So this is one of our Division 45 mentorship series, and we have Dr. Robyn Gobin with us today. So she is going to talk about getting funding and writing grants and fellowship proposals today. So my name is Yue. I'm a third-year doctoral student at Indiana University, and I'm one of the co-chairs on the mentorship committee of Division 45. So we're really grateful for Dr. Gobin to be on our call today and to talk to us about writing grant proposals and funding. Thank you so much, Dr. Gobin.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm delighted to be able to share some of my knowledge regarding grants and fellowship proposals with Division 45 students. So should I just jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Or if you want to do a brief introduction of your interest in that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah. So I am an assistant professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. My research centers around the effects of interpersonal trauma, interpersonal traumas like sexual assault, domestic violence, military sexual trauma on mental health and functioning. So I explore interventions to see how they might become a little bit more effective for some of the most highly traumatized populations. And then I also do some research looking at culture, specifically African-American culture, and the role that it plays in the healing and recovery process with regard to interpersonal trauma. So that's a little bit about me and my background, and a little bit about funding history. So when I was a graduate student, I was able to write successful proposals to the Minority Fellowship Program, as well as the Ford Foundation Fellowship. I was funded for the Ford Foundation's dissertation fellowship, as well as their postdoctoral fellowship, but I had to decline the postdoctoral because I had other competitive funding, but I did write successful proposals for both of those. And then for the Minority Fellowship Program, it was the pre-doctoral fellowship. So that was amazing because it bought me some time with regard to having to teach. And so I could really focus more of my energies on publishing as a graduate student, which we all know is very important. So I kind of come to you with that background. I've continued to write proposals and grants as a faculty member, and have been awarded several different funding opportunities on my college campus, as well as a postdoc. So I'm looking forward to sharing information with you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I saw we have one more student jump on.
Perfect.
Yeah. Vanessa, if you want to give us a brief introduction about yourself and what are you hoping to get out of this experience today, feel free to do that.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
okay,
we can
great.
hear you.
So thank you for having this virtual mentorship. I am a PhD in organizational psychology, and I am in my third year. And I've always been very interested in the process of grants and fellowships. Going into my first year, meaning when I first started in the program, I applied about to 7 grants in total, I think. It was more like 5 grants and 2 fellowships, of which I was awarded the 2 fellowships, but the grants didn't really go through. I applied for the NSF grant. That was the GRFP. Anyway, I tried to really use that time that I had not started the program to try to spend that time applying for as many grants and fellowships as I could. And I found it very rewarding, although I didn't get many responses. I got a few honorable mentions and the 2 fellowships as I discussed. So I'm always interested in trying to use a portion of my time in still developing the skills necessary, or kind of like knowing what is it that they're looking for. And I feel that it seems like every agency that you apply for is looking for something so different.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, if there's one way to start building into understanding what each agency looks for, and making that, really shine in the application process and the proposals that you submit. So that's basically what I would really like to get out of this.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for telling us a little bit about your experience and kind of what you hope to getting out of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. And I plan to kind of touch on that, but definitely towards the end, if you still have remaining questions, don't hesitate to ask me, and we can definitely connect offline if that would be useful to you as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, so let's see if I can have technology cooperate with me with my slides. Okay, perfect. So we've already done introductions, and so I'm just gonna jump right in, starting to talk about developing your grant idea and how you go about doing that. And then once you develop an idea, how do you start writing that grant, things to pay attention to. And then I'll just give a special note to fellowship applications. I think everything that I say about grants is applicable to fellowship applications, but there are just a few kind of unique pieces that I wanted to touch on in that one section on fellowship applications. Then I'll share a few of resources, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. Okay, so developing your grant idea. First, I want to acknowledge this resource. A lot of the information that I'll be sharing today is based on my studying of this particular book. I've been able to go to a few grant writers workshops, and I have this workbook and I've readily used this when I'm preparing my own grant applications. So it's a very valuable resource, I would say, and I like it because they do update this resource, the grant application writers workbook. They update it nearly every year to kind of keep on top of all of the changes that are happening at the federal level, and they do write these books for the different federal agencies. So the one that's on the screen now is for NIH, but they also write them for some of the other federal agencies. So if someone was thinking about, wanting to get a resource that would be useful and kind of applicable across fellowship or grant applications, I would definitely suggest you look into this one. So I just wanted to acknowledge that a lot of the ideas and information I'll be sharing is kind of based off of the information shared in this book. Okay, so developing your grant idea. One of the first things that you want to think about, perhaps, and I say this kind of loosely with graduate students, but I think it's important to consider, is thinking about what your long-term goal is. So really thinking about an area that you are passionate about, that there are unanswered questions in, that you're really interested in, and thinking through how you can kind of develop an idea as your own, or an area as your own, and kind of be known as the content expert in that area. So you want to start there. And then with regard to a long-term goal, kind of think about what the problem is that you want to solve with your research. And kind of at the end of, a career, what would you know, or what problem would you have solved by the end of your career? And then start to think backwards to what are the systematic kind of studies, projects that need to be done to get you to that long-term goal. So I think really your research into chunks and kind of thinking, okay, like what is the first thing that I need to know on this continuum of research projects that's going to get me to the end goal? Where do I want to kind of focus this one grant application on? Another piece is that you definitely want your idea to be literature informed. So you want to comprehensively review the literature and figure out, what do we already know about this problem that you're trying to solve or this area that you're passionate about? What do we already know? How strong are the results in that area? Because sometimes what you'll be proposing is like we, have some case studies to validate this intervention or method, but, we haven't analyzed it in a randomized clinical trial or something like that. So maybe you want to strengthen the base of the knowledge that we already have about a particular issue, or there may be flaws in the existing literature or gaps in the existing literature, and that's really what you want to focus on. So, but you need to know the literature, right, to be able to say how you fit in with what we already know, and also to make sure that you're going to be making a unique contribution rather than just kind of replicating what is already known. Definitely replication has its space, but you want to have at least an aspect of your project that you are contributing that is unique. Also another how you fit in what you may be doing that's different or complementary to what's already being currently being conducted in the research. Another piece is that you want to make sure that your idea kind of will make a significant contribution. Like, will this help move the field forward? Like, is this knowledge that this study will contribute really gonna kind of make a dent? And it doesn't have to be monumental, like Nobel Prize worthy, but it does need to further our knowledge and really kind of help us to think about the problem in different ways and help us to better push forward if it is going to relate to a particular population and how we treat that population. And that's really what you want to be thinking about, or what are the implications of this work if my hypotheses are supported? How does this inform policy? How does it inform practice? How does it inform future research? That's really important to think about. You also want it to be innovative, so you want it to be different. Again, a new spin on something, a new method that you're bringing to an existing problem that's out there that needs to be solved. And then lastly, you want to think through what funding agencies are going to want to fund this. So you want to make sure you don't want to just do a study or come up with a study solely based on what a funding agency says their priorities are, but you do want to make sure that what you're interested in aligns with the funding agency that you're going towards. So you want to be passionate about the idea, but you can't pitch everything to every funding agency. So one of the things, Vanessa, that you're talking about is, well, like, how do I know what they're interested in? And they do publish on their website, definitely the different NIH programs publish what kind of funding priorities that they have, really what they're interested in, especially in the call for grants. A lot of times they will have a lot of descriptive background information really stating the problem or the need that they saw that even spurred them to make this funding call in the first place. And so you really want to pay attention to what are the words that they're using, what examples do they give of, like, projects or questions that they would likely fund with this particular funding call. But you definitely want to make sure that you're relevant with what the funding agency is saying their priorities are. And often priorities shift with regard to kind of like what's going on with society, what, the most recent literature is pushing us towards. So you just want to kind of stay on top of that and know what they care about. And then that helps you to write a more convincing application, because you can kind of tell them how your work fits into their mission and their goals. Okay. All right, so this is something that was talked about explicitly in the Russell and Morrison resource that I put up earlier. They talk about kind of, before you even start writing, doing this impact test for your idea. Will this idea impact the field significantly? And secondly, can I convince others of the fact? Because really what you're doing when you're writing a grant is you are writing a long, persuasive piece. You're informing people, but you're also helping to tell them why they need to fund this project and why funding this project is going to make the huge impact that their organization or their agency wants to make in the first place, and what role that plays in getting them closer to their goals. So that's really important, that you have to be passionate about it, passionate enough and believe in it enough to say that you can convince other people that this is worth funding. So practicality is something that definitely you want to think about. First, can I complete this project? So once you kind of ask yourself all these questions and you've come up with this idea that, you know, is just kind of really seems to be aligned with the funding agency's priorities, and it seems to be doable to you, then you want to start asking yourself, okay, does it kind of pass this test? So can you complete it? Do you need any collaborators? So are there certain pieces that maybe you don't have expertise in? Do you have certain mentors that you're working with that are really known in a particular area? If you have that, then that it might be a good idea to think about bringing them on as a co-investigator or co-principal investigator so that they can help you to kind of put together as competitive of application as you can. So you want to think about that. You want to think about what resources it will take to do this project. Like, do you have, if you're saying that you want to do an fMRI study, like does your university, you know, have imaging resources that you can use to be able to do this research? Will you need pilot funding? So for a lot of NIH grants, they want to see, unless it's one of the smaller grants, definitely for some of the bigger, they want to see that you've actually kind of shown that your study is feasible, that this project is doable, maybe with the case study or with a smaller pilot population. And so you want to make sure that you have done that pilot work. And so if you need to get funding to do that pilot work, maybe that's the first step, is to apply for something smaller that's going to really fund you doing that first step. Do you have access to the population of interest? You know, one thing, when I went to the University of Oregon, and as I mentioned, I was really interested in African Americans and particularly African American women who had experienced sexual assault. And I wanted to know more about religiosity and spirituality and how that plays into healing from interpersonal trauma. But there was not a huge African American female population in Eugene, Oregon. And so I had to think through, like, who is in my network that I could potentially talk to get access to this population that I want. So you want to think about that, because the reviewers of the grant is going to be looking for, okay, how's this person legitimately going to be able to do this? And so you want to have kind of thought through all of the questions that they'll have before they can ask a question. Is it feasible given the funding period? So you want to kind of think through how long it takes to get IRB approval and how long it takes to recruit your population. If you're going to say that you are going to be doing like follow-up periods, like, do you have enough time within the funding period? If the grant is only going to fund you for a year, you have to be feasible and kind of think through, okay, what can I legitimately get done in a year? And in my experience, we definitely always kind of underestimate how long it's going to take us to do things, just because life happens, things come up. And so you want to be very conservative with what you are saying that you're going to do, because if they fund you to do something, then they expect for you to get it all done. So you want to be reasonable and not too over ambitious when you're saying what you're going to complete within that funding period. Do you have a time commitment? That's really important. Given your other responsibilities as a graduate student, you have classes, you may, be working on your dissertation. For some folks, they may be going on an internship. So do you have the time to really commit to doing what you say you're going to do? And how long is the project going to take, and how long do you have time to invest in this before you graduate and move on to the next thing? Because again, if they fund you to do a project, they want reports kind of showing what was the outcome, what came out of this, because they are investing in that outcome and they want to see that. So you have to think about that up front. And if, the project that you're thinking about may not kind of fit within the time that you have left in your program, then maybe you want to consider shortening it or condensing it in some way. Okay, also another piece, do I need additional training to think about? So for example, like, would it be really useful with this project that you're doing to combine qualitative and quantitative methods, but your background is largely in qualitative and you don't have a quantitative background? Like, could it be something where maybe you could apply for a training grant so that you can say that part of, you know, me conducting the study is also getting this extra training in a particular area? That's something that you want to think about too. So with the F31 and F32, those are pre-doctoral and postdoctoral fellowships. And then there's also the K series where you could do a, as a postdoc, you can apply for a K award through like NIH or another one of the federal institutions. So that's just something to think about. You want to kind of think about, what do I have, what expertise do I have that I'm bringing to the table, but also what else is needed to complete this project to the best of its ability. And if I don't have the background, is there a part of the grant that I can write to say I'll get the training? If that's a part of their initiatives with that particular grant. If it's not, then it would be best to think about what collaborators you can bring on board. All right, so knowing your neighbors. So good ideas are often generated independently by more than one person. So this is the idea that often there's other people that are thinking through the things that you're thinking about in a lab somewhere else across the country. And so you just want to know what they're doing and how they're doing it. So who has been funded in the area? One excellent resource is the NIH reporter. You can search people by their name. So if you kind of see someone at a conference that, you know, did a study that kind of aligns with something you're thinking about, you can look them up that way. Or you can look up the projects by keyword search. So by title or some keyword that's related to your area that you're interested in. And so this kind of gives you an idea, definitely, if you're wanting to get funded in the same area, what particular spin they put on it and how that kind of may have really hit home for that particular funding agency. So then you can see how to shape your argument as well. So also, how can their work inform what you're thinking about? So, you know, how maybe they're doing something in a way that you hadn't thought about, and maybe that kind of gives you another angle to your hypothesis, or it, you know, gives you another idea for another measure that you want to throw in to look at outcomes. So that's important. And then how will my work be different? Again, this kind of speaks to the novelty, to the innovation, making sure that you're making a significant contribution that's not simply replicating what other people are doing, but adding something new, even if it's just with a different population that, you know, is understudied, that can be significant. All right, so another piece is funding potential. So thinking through which agencies would be interested in funding this particular idea that you have. And so I think a lot of times, because they have the big bucks, people think about the federal agencies, but there's also, you know, smaller foundations that have a good amount of money that you want to look into, because a lot of times foundations really do have specific problems, public health concerns that they're very interested in helping to solve, and they will invest their resources in that area. And sometimes these foundation grants are a little less competitive than some of the federal grants. And so it could be a nice way to get your feet wet and also get some substantial funding for your work that's still very legitimate, and that may set you up for larger funding through a federal agency if that's the way that you want to go. Also thinking through how much money do I need, because that can help you narrow down which agencies I should go towards, or which particular grant mechanisms within a particular agency should I target. Thinking through what do I really need, because a lot of times projects can be done pretty economically or frugally, and you don't need as much money, and so you don't want to be targeting a particular grant mechanism that's typically reserved for large, you know, multi-million-dollar projects. And then which agency is best positioned to meet my needs? So you want to make sure that your idea aligns with their funding priorities, as I mentioned before. And you may consider sending the same application to multiple agencies. So I know, Vanessa, you may know that writing grant applications takes a lot of time, energy, effort, and particularly if it's not funded, it feels very frustrating because you've put so much time, energy, and effort. So sometimes it is not a bad idea to pitch it to multiple agencies, the same application at the same time, especially if they have similar deadlines. You can definitely send it out, but with the caveat that you want to make sure that you read all of the fine print within the particular grant that you're going for, because within NIH in particular, you can't do any within agency double dipping. So you can't send it to two of the same institutes or agencies within NIH. You have to just pick one to send it to. But if you're doing like NIH and like a Ford Foundation fellowship, you can send the same idea to both, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then you may just have the beautiful problem of having to decide between the two, which that's not a bad problem to have. Okay, another critical piece is getting feedback. So one thing that can be great to do if the agency allows this, I know NIH does this, they have program officers that will read a one-page kind of prepared proposal to give you feedback and kind of tell you how this is kind of aligning with how they're seeing the funding going within their agency. And so this may be the same thing with other fellowships that you're applying for, other grants that you're applying for, where there's someone who has been there for a while, is aware of what the agency is looking for, and can really give you that insight that maybe you can't get from just reading the grant description on what they're really interested in and whether your idea is even worth moving forward with a particular agency. And so on the screen, I just have some things that you might want to include in that one-page overview. I'm thinking through the literature, what gaps is your project addressing, what's your hypothesis, what's the rationale for doing this? Like, in other words, why does this work need to be done? Why does this project need to be done? Expected outcomes, and then how those outcomes are going to advance the field. Again, thinking through what are the, practice implications, what are the literature implications, and what are the policy implications if your hypotheses are confirmed or supported. Then, outside of just going to the agency trying to get feedback, another way is to tap on your mentors and other faculty that are there in your department that have, some kind of expertise in the area that you are wanting to get funded in, and ask them to read your, one-page overview and give you a background. A lot of times this is something that people are willing to do because it's so small. It's only one page. It's very succinct. And so they can kind of get a good sense of what you're trying to do and give you some really good tips about angles that you might want to think about, as well as strategies for you to try to get this funded. So that's really important for them to give you kind of the scientific pieces, as well as kind of thinking through technically how you might be able to navigate doing this project that you're thinking about doing at your particular university. So I can't stress that enough, how important that is to get this feedback. A lot of times we are busy as graduate students and may not think about getting the feedback, or we may think, oh, my mentor is so, busy writing their own grants and publishing their own papers, they don't have time. But that's a part of what they signed up for, to be a research mentor. And so they want to support you. And if you get funded, that helps them to look good as well. So definitely don't be shy about asking for folks to read over your ideas, or even if you don't have anything written down, just to talk with you through your ideas, because that was tremendously helpful for me in graduate school, just sitting down with the pad and talking to people and kind of going after the meeting and reviewing my notes, and it helped me to really kind of sharpen my ideas. Then after you get this feedback, of course, you want to refine your idea. So if you talk to a program officer, if you talk to several different mentors about your ideas, you want to, of course, incorporate their feedback as appropriate. And why I say as appropriate is because sometimes people give you feedback that really just doesn't feel like it resonates for you. So for example, if someone maybe has more of a different background, like I'll give an example for some of the work that I wanted to do was kind of looking at effects of certain types of traumas on people's mental health and their functioning. And some people kind of said, well, you know, like the funding climate is really big into neuropsych, and maybe you ought to think about, you know, adding a neuropsych piece, and that would be, you know, highly fundable and something that's very interesting. But at the time, I really wasn't interested in neuropsych. And so, of course, it was a great idea. And it was true that the funding agencies were kind of looking at more neuro and biological bases of behavior. And I had to think through what I was going to be excited about actually executing should the project get funded. So you don't just want to take everyone's opinion and incorporate it, especially if it's going to definitely kind of change the trajectory of the whole project. You want to make sure that that project is still something that you're going to be excited about, excited to write about, and also excited to actually conduct if it gets funded. And another piece too, you don't want to add something that doesn't really resonate or that you're not as familiar with, because you have to have confidence in your idea's merit. Like you have to be able to sell it enthusiastically. And if you're not enthusiastic about it, it's going to come across in your grant application, and then you're going to get dinged for that. And you also just have to have the commitment. I can't stress that enough. Once you get these grants, you have to do the project. And so if you know, are not too enthused about it, you want to maybe take a pause on whether you want to incorporate some pieces of feedback. All right, so then writing your grants. So after you have, you know, nailed down your idea, you've gotten a lot of feedback, and you feel like you have a very solid idea that's significant, it's gonna impact the field, then what do you do? So first, before you start writing, some things to consider. First, review the eligibility criteria. I can't say that enough. So especially for fellowship applications, you want to make sure that you and your team members are eligible for the particular mechanism that you're going after. So you want to, with a very critical eye, read through everything on the website, look at the frequently asked questions on their site, just make sure that in all ways you fulfill the funding criteria that they have, as well as your institution. Sometimes they have stipulations about what types of places they fund. You want to make sure that your institution meets those criteria. Sometimes it's useful to contact the funder with questions. So the agency, oftentimes they'll have a contact on their website. Don't be shy about shooting them an email. I know sometimes people might have trepidation about, well, I don't want to seem like, you know, I'm ignorant or I don't know. And so I'll just kind of go for it. But really, you will be happy that you contacted them, because you don't want to put a bunch of time and energy into something and then later on the back end find out that it didn't even get reviewed because you weren't eligible. So sometimes funders have information sessions. I know Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is very good about when they have a new call for a new funding opportunity, they will do a webinar that explains the funding opportunity in detail, and they'll answer a lot of these questions about who's eligible, what the money can be used for if you get the money. And so this is a very useful way to kind of have contact with the funding agency ahead of time and get all of your questions answered. And then this is a big deal. What terms will your university need to agree to if the grant is funded? So sometimes with larger grants, it's not necessarily the money is not being deposited in your personal account, it's being deposited to the university. So the university grants office has to sign a contract with the funder kind of on your behalf. And so you have to be aware of what your university is willing or not willing to agree to, the terms that they're willing to agree to. And that's important to think about too before you even start pursuing. And so this may mean setting up a meeting with your contact in the grants office at your university just to make sure that you dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. Okay, so timeline. Of course, you want to look at the grant deadline and make sure that you have enough time and work backwards from that deadline. You also want to know who will be submitting the grant and how it will be submitted. So for federal grants, your grants office will typically help you upload the grant to the system or the portal that it's going to be submitted through, and you don't submit it yourself. And so what this means is that you will need to have enough time to send, this to the grants office so that they can submit it by the deadline. Often they want it a week, maybe 2 weeks prior to the deadline. And so you want to know that so that you build that time into your timeline. Again, you want to ensure that you're kind of complying with the university and sponsor policies as well. And so it could be useful to meet with the university sponsor programs to really understand what their process is. I know a lot of times they help with budget. And so that's important to get with them to make sure that you know the recent changes with regard to different costs that are, so if you say you want to hire undergrads to transcribe your, qualitative data that you get, you want to know what's the going rate at your university for that. Has it changed since last year? You want to keep up with that. So it'll be useful to meet with them and just get these questions answered. Then you want to create a checklist of all of the different pieces of the grant. And so that's like the, actual meat of the grant, like the, background, the significance, as well as the method section. But you just want to make sure you know all of the pieces that you'll need to put together in order to have a complete grant package. So you can include all of that in your timeline. And then with regard to the budget, I believe I already talked about this, but just make sure that you know what cost the funder allows. That's really important. Some agencies are really particular about what you can use the money for. So some, with food, they're particular about like what if you can buy food with the money, or in what context you can buy food. If you're saying that you're wanting to pay participants at focus groups or give them food, you have to think about that. And also request enough funds to cover anticipated cost increases. So as I mentioned earlier, year to year, rates change for certain things. And so you just want to make sure if it's a multi-year grant that each year you're not putting the same cost for different things, because it may change and you want to allow for those increases so that you're not at a deficit. Okay, so also you want to create a writing schedule, because we all know that life gets busy and that you have, other pressing demands that may come up and may try to steal away your grant writing time. So you want to make sure that you schedule it in your calendar as kind of like a weekly or even maybe a daily process that you do. The resource that I shared earlier recommends that you devote 4 to 6 months to the process. So this is including all of the pre-planning that I talked about, with kind of getting a clear sense of what's happening in the literature and really kind of exploring the different agencies and what their priorities are. You want to do all of that within this 4 to 6 months. So that's important to take into consideration. Some people, of course, don't take that long. I would just say know yourself and what works best for you with regard to how long of a duration you need to plan out. But definitely it's good practice to block off this time for grant writing. A lot of writing experts will tell you that writing every day is a good practice. And it really is, because if you are only writing or working on a grant one time a week, then part of the time that you spend each week is just reorienting yourself to where you left off and, kind of coming back to your thoughts. Whereas if you have an hour every day or 2 hours every day, it's fresher on your mind so that you're being more efficient with the grant writing time that you set aside. So it really is useful if you can make it happen to have time each day or at least a few times a week to work on the proposal. But do what works best for you. If you know yourself, you know how you write, you know when you write best, the time of the day, whether you need breaks or whether you need long chunks. So just do what is going to result in the best product for you. Also being reasonable with your timeline. So, if summer's coming up and you know that you're going to want to take a vacation, kind of putting that into your timeline so that you give yourself, extra time to really work on the grant. Again, I said sometimes you need to do a pre-submission review. So maybe you need to submit it earlier to the grants office if they're going to submit it for you. But also, you need to get people to read your grant before you submit it. So those same colleagues that you asked about, how your idea was when you were first formulating it, you want to go back. I mean, ideally, you will have a mentor or someone that's working with you that you can kind of send piece by piece. Like once you get the significance done, you can send that to them and get feedback. Once you get the research strategy done, you can send that and get feedback. But if not, if you have a full draft, you definitely just don't want to send that with only you have looking at it. You want someone else that hasn't been so close to the process that can give you that kind of critical feedback and point out things that are just not going to be visible to you because you're so close to the project. And you want to build in time for that. Sometimes people want a month to be able to do that. Same thing for letters of support. Often if, you're having someone that's saying that they're going to be a mentor for you, and that's typically required for fellowship applications, they're going to need to write a letter for you. You have to give them enough time to prepare that letter. And you also want to make sure that they prepare a letter that's going to be top quality. So they need time for that. And also, you'll likely need letters of support if you're going to be collecting data at a particular off-site somewhere. Like on postdoc, I wrote a grant about working with folks that were currently incarcerated. And so that was something where I needed a letter of support from the folks at the jail to say that they welcomed me, that they allowed research, they valued research, so that the funders would see that this would be feasible and that I wouldn't run into roadblocks with recruitment. Okay, so grant section. So this will likely vary by, what type of grant you're applying for, what agency it's a part of, but they typically have these sections that are on the board. So the specific aims is kind of like your overview of what your grant is going to be. It's a one-page that says, why is this important? Why do we need to do it? How will I do it? What do I anticipate the outcomes will be? And why are those outcomes so important to the field, to the public health, what have you? So that's really important. Also, you're going to have to write a research strategy of some sorts to just say what the background is in this area. How do I fit into what is currently known? How am I expanding on what's currently known? And then what is my approach for doing it? How am I going to explore this problem or help to solve this problem? What methods am I going to use? What populations am I going to target? And so a lot of times they'll want timetables to kind of show systematically throughout the funding period what you're going to be doing every month or maybe every quarter. So you want to do that. That really helps to you just give them a visual of what you're doing. And also you want to speak to future directions typically in your grant and say, okay, after this project is funded and, you know, I submit a few papers based on this work, this is the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to apply for a larger grant to kind of move to that next piece. Remember, I talked about the long-term research plans. You want to kind of build in, how is this project going to be the foundation of this larger career that you're building? Okay, so writing, getting to writing. So a huge piece is that, you know, you want your opening sentence to be attention grabbing. So you really want to stay away from just restating something that's the obvious. Like, you know, cancer is a huge public health concern. Like we all know that. So you want to really kind of speak to what's exciting, what's different about what you're doing, and kind of grab them up front, like with what's the problem that you're tackling, and why is this such a huge problem, and why is it necessary that we take action now? We want to think about, when you're writing, that it's important for you to inform and educate your reader. So 9 times out of 10, the people who review your grant will not be experts in your field. It will be awesome if they were sometimes, because then you could use all the jargon and they know exactly what you mean, but that's not always going to be the case. So you want to write with that in mind, that not all the time people are going to know exactly my field. So I have to kind of position it for them. I have to tell them what's the current state of knowledge in the field to help them understand why this project that I'm proposing is so important. Pointing out the gap in the knowledge is really key. So making it very explicit what is not known and why it's important that we do know this, that's really important. Also stating a statement of what's going to happen if we don't fund this right now today. You want to really kind of play that part up, that, you know, if we don't fund this research, you know, these are the consequences for not only individuals, but for society. You want to talk about that in a very compelling way. So kind of pull at their heartstrings and pull at like why this is important and why this is necessary. You want to state your long-term goal, again, that big picture goal of this project is going to help us move closer to X end goal. It's going to answer this one question so that then we can move to the next step of solving this larger problem that's out there. And then coming back to what's the objective of this particular grant. So we have this big picture, but how does this fit into the big picture? And why is this a necessary puzzle piece to solving the big picture issue? And also being very explicit about what products will be produced, like what knowledge, what specific knowledge that we don't have now will be produced. And sometimes that's, the product is a little bit more literal for certain fellowship applications. Like they want to know, what are you going to do with this? Like, are you going to present it at conferences? Are you going to write manuscripts? How many manuscripts are you going to write? Or are you going to use this to inform a larger grant that you're going to write? Is this going to be pilot data for that? Of course, you want to state the hypothesis, and this is better when it's supported by, again, that preliminary pilot data that you've already done to show that this project is feasible. You want to articulate why you want to do the research, what will become possible after this research is completed that's not possible now. And it, again, should link back to those consequences that you talked about for, like, how is this problem affecting our society, and how will this knowledge that I'm producing help it to not impact in such a negative way. You want to clearly explain the methods and your analysis plan. So you want to be very clear about, the population that you're targeting, about how you're going to recruit, where you're going to recruit from, the procedures. All of those pieces are super important because, again, you are not there to advocate for yourself when your reviewer is reading your application. All they can go off of is what you've written. And so you want to make sure that you've not left out any information that's going to cause them to pause. Because I don't know if you've ever read something, but it happens to me when I have a question about something. I try to keep reading, but that question kind of always sticks out and continues to bother me because I really didn't understand something. And so that can happen with the reviewer, and they can kind of have a totally different outlook on your application just because there was this question, this key fundamental piece that you didn't address, and it just keeps throwing them off, that they can't get the gist of the rest of your grant application. You want to, again, with the analysis plan, that's very important. So sometimes, again, if data analysis is not your strength, it's not something that you feel as comfortable as you would like with, bring on a collaborator, bring on a statistical consultant that can help you write this piece, because this is important. You can't just kind of shortchange it and just say, well, we'll do some, analysis, analysis of variance, and we'll do a few regressions, and that'll be that. They want to know specifically, like, what are your independent variables? What are your dependent variables? What will this model be like that you're proposing and testing? So you want to have very clearly articulated that. Very important to include a power analysis in your analysis plan. So how many participants do you need to be able to say with confidence that this is a true difference that you're seeing, and it's not just kind of error or not just by chance. Plan for missing data. They want to see that. That happens in real world research, and you need to be able to talk about what your plan is for addressing the missing data. You want to pay attention to the research environment. So oftentimes funders want to know, is the university that you're in set up to help you to succeed? Basically, do they have the resources, the personnel, everything that you will need to do this project that you've proposed? So you want to be able to speak to why your university is the best place for you to be doing this research, with the different entities that they have on campus. Like if you're doing, cancer-related research and they have a special center related to cancer-related research, you want to speak about that and say how, you'll have access to the colleagues there, the knowledge that's produced there. You'll have access to different resources that are on campus, whether it be, your grant writing support system that you have at your university, the statistical packages that you'll have access to. All of those are really important. Also, speaking to the folks that have been funded at your university to kind of show that your university, this is not new to your university getting grants, and your university knows how to handle and execute the grants in a way that leads to the best possible outcomes. Okay, so just some basic writing tips. You want to just be clear and have very crisp sentences. So no long, jargony or run-on sentences. You want to just make sure that each sentence kind of pops and has a clear purpose for being there. This is also really important too, because oftentimes you're limited on how much space you have when you write grants. And so you don't want to kind of misuse the space that you have with unnecessary words or unnecessary sentences. Make sure you explain all acronyms when you get steeped in a particular field and it's just kind of normal to use certain acronyms. You can slip. I slip with this sometimes with PTSD because I'm a trauma person, and I'm like, oh yeah, I have to remember. Most people know what PTSD is, but you just make sure that you explain all acronyms the first time that you use them. Then you can use them just normally, but you want to make sure that every time you introduce it that you explain what it means. charts and figures can be really useful. They can explain a lot with very little words. And that, again, is important because you're often limited with the pages that you have or the space that they're allowing for you to write your grant application. Just make sure to follow the rules. A lot of times, you know, there's always more that you want to say. There's more that you want to add. You know, didn't get to fit something into the method section, so you want to include it as appendices. Make sure that they allow you to have appendices. So just make sure that you're doing everything within your power not to get the grant thrown out before it's even reviewed, because sometimes they get so many applications that they look for these minor things to be able to disqualify. And so you don't want to have that happen to you, especially after you put in so much hard work. Another thing to know is that readers are going to definitely spend less time than you spent writing the application. And sometimes they'll spend less time than maybe is ideal for them reviewing your application. So what this means is that you want to make it easy to understand, make it very clear to follow the different paragraphs, knowing that maybe someone will start at this paragraph, maybe they'll skip the second paragraph, they'll go to the third paragraph, and make it so that it just flows so logically that they won't miss a beat even though they skipped that second paragraph. And so the advice that I got when I was a postdoc was like, think about this, you know, full tenured professor that's on a red eye flight across the country with their coffee, and they're sitting there on the plane half falling asleep and they're reviewing your grant. Like, that's who you want to think about writing to, because sometimes that is the environment. They're, you know, shuffling, they're busy, they do a lot of things, and they're reviewing this in the midst of all of the other things that they have going on. They're very busy. And so you want to make it so that it's not frustrating to read your grant, and it's very easy to read it and clear for them. But I think that's really important, just knowing that they're not going to be able to spend as much time with your grant as maybe they would like to. And so you want to make it easy for them because they have many more grants to review than just yours. Okay, so after you've incorporated all these writing tips, now you have a draft of the grant. What do? So at this early, you read, you reread, and you revise. So again, read the protocol in its entirety, make revisions yourself. Then you want to send it out for feedback to colleagues. Fellow graduate students can be great with this. Other faculty at my university, we exchange grants all the time, reading drafts, giving each other feedback on several different iterations. It's very helpful to do for colleagues, but then also more seasoned people. So for you, that would be faculty, getting them to give you feedback. They don't have to be in your field. And actually, sometimes it's best that they're not in your field because they are really coming in green, and you if they can understand it, then you really know you did a good job, right? Versus if it's someone who's in your field who already knows. So you want to make sure that someone, you know, in, you know, I don't know, fine arts can pick up your application and understand it.
Yeah. Hi, Dr.
Yeah.
Gobin.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I know we're a little bit out of time.
Okay. Yeah. So
I actually, no, that's okay. I actually have another meeting that I need to get to.
Okay.
But it's completely fine for you and Vanessa just to continue and finish
Sure.
up. And I know Vanessa had a question from the chat, and
yes,
perhaps you can kind of finish that up if you want
okay.
to.
Yeah, so I only have like a couple more slides and then we can do that.
Okay, sounds great. So I'll just leave my screen on, and I'll step out, but you can just continue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry
know we got
for
started
not
a
being
little
able
bit
to.
late, so
Yeah.
that's probably why we're going over, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and I'll definitely see you the same time next Sunday as well for
Sounds
our
good.
second part.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And it's good to see you, Vanessa.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so the takeaway from this slide is really to read, revise, and keep getting feedback, and until you feel really confident with the final product that you have. Then after, you've sent it, I've had the experience where I've sent it to several different mentors, several different colleagues, and then I have this final draft. You just want to make sure that after you've accepted all the track changes, that you clean that all out, accept all the changes, and then read it one last time, because ultimately there's always like some missing like letter that you didn't realize that accidentally got put in there, and you just don't want to have those simple mistakes in the final draft that you send out to the funding agency. Know the review criteria. So this is specific to NIH, but this is what they explicitly state their review criteria are, but most other funding agencies also look at these elements. So I think it applies across the board. Thinking about significance, can you articulate why we need this project? Why is it important? What problem are we going to solve here? You want to be able to speak about yourself. I know that's something that we have issues with, especially women. A lot of times we don't want to feel like we're bragging on ourselves, or that we, are kind of full of ourselves. But you have to be able to speak about who you are, what you bring to the table, and why you are best positioned to conduct this research, because they are going to want to know that and be convinced that you are capable of doing this work. Innovation, again, that's just being able to explain that this is something new, this is a new approach, it's different, it's going to move the field forward because you're using a new way of thinking about this problem. You want to, again, articulate your approach. That's the methods and the analysis plan and the data collection plan, all of that. You want to explicitly state that and make sure that there's not holes in your logic there and your reasoning there. If you say you're not going to do certain things, kind of giving an explanation for why you made this decision, maybe over another decision. And then, as I spoke to earlier, environment, making sure that it's clear why the university that you selected, that you're saying that you're at, is the best place to do this research, and how they're going to support you in moving forward this research agenda. Okay, so then just a nod to the fellowship applications. Know the priorities. So one thing I want to just say here is that a lot of times with fellowships, they're more interested in funding you and not the project. They care about the research, but really what they're wanting to support is you and your continued growth and development as a researcher. And so you want to be able to speak to, again, what you have right now, and also what your needs are as far as training, if that's applicable to the funding agency. Compelling personal statement, again, if applicable. I always tell people, a lot of people have the great grades, they have, they have a great amount of publications. And so on paper, in those respects, you look similar. The personal statement is really where you can help yourself to stand out, and you want to do that in a very compelling way. You want to be able to craft a logical narrative that ties together various experiences that you've had. So if you kind of jumped around from different research ideas because, when you first got to graduate school, you're interested in this, and then it totally changed, that's fine. But you just want to make sure that you tell a story that shows how these things are related and kind of how your thinking has evolved and how you've grown from those different experiences. So it's not a bad thing to have varied research experiences, but you just have to tell a compelling story with it and really kind of pull out those pieces that you've learned that have made you a better researcher and that have positioned you to the space you are now, which is you're in a space where you are competitive for the funding that they are offering. Again, follow instructions. That's just something that make sure you always do. Highlight strengths and clarify the gaps in training. Again, show the need. So a lot of times fellowships want to fund you because they realize that you're early in your career, you're just starting out. They want you to go on to be a researcher in the next level in your career. And so you have to show that while you do have all this promise, that you also have some areas for growth. And so you don't want to shy away from saying that, because if you already know everything and this is a grant to train people, then they may not select you because you already know everything. So you have to find a way to be able to say, like, yes, I'm awesome, and I'll benefit from these additional skills that I'll learn through doing this research project. Letters of reference, again, like, you're always going to need a letter of reference if you're a graduate student applying for a fellowship. You want to ask early. You want to ask wisely. So you want to make sure that the person you're asking is in a position to write you a good letter, a letter that speaks to your strengths, a letter that shows that they really know you, that they really know your passions, that they've kind of seen your growth and development as a researcher. Not everybody can do that just because you took a class with them. So you want to make sure that the people you ask can write a great letter for you. I encourage meeting with the reference writer if possible. Maybe even preparing a bulleted list of accomplishments that you would like them to highlight. So maybe you wrote this one manuscript that's really related to this project that you're seeking funding for, and you want them to highlight that in their letter of reference. There's nothing wrong about saying that to them and highlighting that for them. It's actually helpful, so they don't have to kind of read through your whole CV and try to figure out what they need to pick out. You can provide them with some guidance and show them what is most relevant to this particular fellowship application. It's not bad to provide reminders. Oftentimes, again, faculty are busy. So, maybe 2 weeks out from the deadline, not a bad idea to just send a reminder, make sure that it's on their radar, that they're working on the letter. So I just put some fellowships of interest here. I mentioned the American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program that I was funded through as a graduate student, as well as the Ford Foundation. They have pre-doctoral, dissertation, and postdoctoral fellowships. So this is a really good one to be looking into because they fund you throughout, all the phases of the graduate education career. And then also Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is another awesome one. I wanted to speak to self-care because that's really important for me. This is time-intensive, writing grants, writing fellowship applications. You want to make sure that you're consistently taking care of yourself. Don't take rejection personally. If you're putting yourself out there, you're writing these fellowship applications, likely it's going to happen that you're not going to get funded at some point. You have to kind of just realize that it's not necessarily you. Different funding agencies are just looking for different things sometimes, and it's just the luck of the draw with regard to how many applications they got, again, how that matched up with what their needs were, what they were really looking for, what the reviewers were looking for. So you have to be able to take it, learn from the rejection. I would also suggest asking for feedback. That can sometimes be really hard. And some agencies will tell you up front that they don't provide feedback. They just provide you with the results. But if they don't, I have reached back out to folks and said, could we have a phone call? I really like to know how I can strengthen my application for the next time. And sometimes people are very open to that and giving you very specific ideas for how you can improve it. Take time away as needed. So again, if you've experienced the rejection of, putting out all these applications and everything's coming back as a no, take time away as needed. You don't have to figure it out all at once. You want to kind of go away and rejuvenate yourself so that you come back in a space where you can best take that feedback. And persistence is really key with fellowship applications. I know I've talked to a lot of folks that said that they've had to apply for things multiple times before they finally got it funded. So do not lose heart. And it's not you, it's just the system and the way it's set up, how much funding that's out there. That's just what you have to do. And then these are just some resources that I found that were pretty helpful with regard to writing grant applications as well as fellowship proposals. So I can send these links out to folks if that would be useful. All right, and that's it. All right, so I have time if you wanted to ask any particular questions.
Yes, I had one question that came to mind when you spoke about the importance of signifying in your application that you're in a university or in a position that will be a good background for you to conduct this research. What happens if you're in a particular field in which grants are not given very frequently, and therefore the faculty in your department has really not been very enthusiastic about promoting grant applications. So
Yeah.
not only the field is not very open because it's a field that benefits a lot of private industries in general,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not very open. Many of the calls of the agencies that are out there that talk more about key I guess problems that are addressing situations of great importance in today's age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely have been able to spin a lot of the research that I do into making it timely and to making it important to research. But I find myself with a very limited amount of resources when it comes to the university and the faculty, and their encouragement to dedicate the time that takes to write a grant when you can just dedicate that time to your dissertation. So
Yeah,
can you
yeah, that is hard. I mean, because they do have a point. Their goal is to graduate you and to get you out so you can do the work that you want to do in the next phase of your career. So I think, going to folks outside of your department is not a terrible idea. Like if you have, I know you mentioned that you were in IO, is that right? Yeah, so if you're an IO, maybe if there's another branch of psychology that's at your university that is more well versed or more supportive of writing grants, maybe pitching it to them, getting feedback from them because they kind of know what it takes to get funded because they have more experience. That's something that I would say. And also just making sure that you are balancing your priorities, that like, yes, you need to be working on your dissertation and that's really important, but also it will look awesome to have funding and that would be great, and also it'll help you to do the work that you're really passionate about doing too. So I would just say finding that balance, but also not being afraid to go outside of your home department if that's what you need, or even outside of your institution. I mentioned that I went to graduate school in Eugene, Oregon, and there was not a large African American community there. I ended up connecting with a woman at Pepperdine University to do some research on African American female sexual assault survivors. So that was a really important connection that I made, and I didn't know her. I just went up to her after a conference presentation and said, I really enjoyed this. This is who I am. These are my interests. Would love to potentially explore collaborating. I gave her my card, also reached out after I got back home, and we were able to set up this collaboration, and I got a publication out of that. So same way with grants, saying like, here, this is who I am. And I think it would be really attractive actually to someone who maybe could use your expertise on their grant. So maybe that's the way to do it, is not necessarily to write your own, but to become like a co-investigator or co-principal investigator on a grant that someone else is working on. And so you can do a lot of the work, especially if you're a faculty member, they're busy, they would welcome all of the energy that you have as a graduate student, the kind of how close you are to the literature, and that aspect will be great in helping them to complete the writing of the grant application. So thinking about it from that angle too, are they working on something where you have a level of expertise that you could provide, that they would see it as beneficial to bring you on to a grant that they're working on.
Okay. And then a second question.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if your hypotheses don't show significance and you have been funded for that grant?
Yeah, so they do know that that's a possibility when they fund you. So it's not the end of the world. Typically what they'll ask for is a report, like a annual report. They will want to kind of see what progress you've made towards completing the things that you put in your timeline that you said you were going to complete, and make sure you've done those things. And then you would just simply kind of talk about what you did. Now, making sure that those non-significant findings weren't like because you made a mistake or error or something like that with regard to how you recruited or how you analyzed the data. But if it turns out that that was not the case, then you just kind of talk about what, similar to a discussion section in a manuscript, like the findings that we found in this study, are not aligned with the findings that so-and-so found. Possible reasons why it could be X, Y, Z. So you kind of state that out. Like maybe it was a different outcome or different variable that you had not previously considered that, has resonated now or has come through the focus group data that you got, that maybe this is really what the key is, or this is the mechanism that maybe you didn't think about before. So just, I think, being as honest as possible about how, what you did, what you found, and how you move forward from here. And why is it important for you to still continue pursuing this line of research despite, the non-significant findings in this particular study. And I would also say getting mentorship around how to craft that and how to talk about that is really important.
Wonderful. All right, thank you so much. I really
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you too for staying on. And if you have any, I'm sorry, that's my dog. If you have any concerns or any other questions that come up later, feel free to email me. My email is on the screen. And then also, if you have any questions as I'm preparing for next Sunday's webinar, please feel free to send those to my email or what have you, so that I can make sure to address your specific concerns that you have, because next week I'm going to focus more on getting published.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.